Ladies and gentlemen, if we could, we are going to begin our program. There are one or two participants who are en route. I see Mrs. Burns coming in, so I presume that Doctor is right behind her. He's always right behind. But we're going to get started because I'm sure we're going to have a very lively evening. I'm Charles Teemer, and I have the great pleasure of serving as your moderator this evening. It is indeed an honor for me to welcome all of you to the Amistad Research Center as we continue the historic celebration of double victory fighting in two fronts, the African American experience. As you know, the Amistad Center is dedicated to preserving history, and the name evolves from the slave ship Amistad, which in 1839 had a terrible battle at sea, and that struggle caused the American Missionary Association to come of being. The American Missionary Association, which was related to the United Church of Christ now, led to the establishment of 6 colleges and universities. Included would be Talladega, Tougaloo, Fisk, Dillard, Houston-Tillotson, and Lemoyne-Owen. That subsequently led to the establishment of the Amistad Center, which was established first at Fisk University in 1966, was later independently organized in 1969, came to New Orleans, and here we are today, the Amistad Center at Tulane University, and of course represents one of the most diverse archives in American history, and it's one of the largest in the world. This center is indeed one of the truly hidden treasures in this city and in this country. We welcome you tonight, and I would like to, at this time, call on Dr. Leonard Burns.
Hello, Charlie Teeman.
Come in, sir.
It's always a pleasure to shake a good hand.
I'm going to call on the distinguished chair of the board, Dr. Andrea Greene Jefferson, for remarks. Dr. Jefferson.
Thank you, Dr. Teemer. Good evening. Dr. Teemer, Dr. Cowan, distinguished World War II veterans, guests, I am honored by your presence at the Amistad Research Center on tonight, and I am honored to have the opportunity to be with you as we continue this historic celebration of the African American experience in World War II. Thank you, veterans, for helping us to remember, and thank you for allowing us to celebrate the great contributions that African American men and women in uniform made while fighting abroad, knowing in their hearts that they were not truly free at home. Thank you for not letting us forget. America needs to know, and America needs to never forget that you had to fight 2 wars at the same time. We here at the Amistad Research Center are honored to be a part of this double victory celebration. We thank you, and we ask that God will continue to keep you safe and to bless you. And we ask that our children will never, ever forget your great contributions. Thank you.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have the great pleasure of presenting to you Dr. Cowan, the distinguished president and leader of this great university.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. It's a pleasure for me to be here this evening to celebrate this absolutely wonderful occasion an occasion where we celebrate and recognize the African American experience of World War II. I am not a veteran of World War II. I am not an historian, so I could not tell you from the perspective of someone who was there firsthand the experiences that our distinguished guests went through, nor as an historian can I tell you what it must have been like, because I have done a lot of reading about the subject. But I am a veteran of a different time and a different war, having served for 3 years as an infantry enlisted man and officer in the 1960s. And there's one story I remember as I was an officer in training that I'd like to sort of recount to all of you. It was my last year of training as an officer at Fort Benning, Georgia, where I was preparing in my last 6 months to become an officer. And of course, that time, people of color mingled easily. We trained together, we lived together, we enjoyed each other's company. We took it for granted because we thought it was always like that. And one evening, I remember, in the midst of our training, we were sitting down and having a discussion about the armed services and what it was like to have people of color working side by side in the name of our country. And a very wise master sergeant came by and heard our conversation of these second lieutenants about to be, and he said, "Young men, you have it all wrong because you have no sense of history." He then sat down with us one night because he was a veteran of World War II. He was an individual who fought on 2 fronts. And he did tell us the experiences that African Americans had in World War II, the racism they felt in the military, the racism they felt at home, yet a deep desire to work on behalf of a country where they experienced bigotry and hatred. I remember that conversation that evening as if it happened yesterday because it left a memory on my mind that I just can't forget. And I think he told it to us because we were going to become officers and he didn't want us to forget the lessons. So even though I have not shared the experiences that these gentlemen have, I have an appreciation for what they have done. And I think what we have to remember is not only did they fight in the Great World War II, and made huge contributions to the American success. Not only did they combat racism in the military and at home, but in fact, they were the forerunners of all the positive things to happen there ever during the Civil Rights Movement. I'd like to tell you as I stand here today that the war is over, but it's not. I guess there is more equality today than perhaps there was 10, 20 years ago, and certainly 50 years ago, but so much more needs to be done. So as we listen to their stories tonight, I hope we not only learn about their experiences during the war, I hope we not only take away lessons about bigotry and hatred and racism, but we take out lessons about how we continue to make our world a better place for all of us. I am deeply honored to be in a room with these gentlemen because I understand the contributions they have made. And I wouldn't be able to be here today doing what I do if it wasn't for them. And we talk in this day and age about heroes and what heroes are. These are heroes in the best sense of the word. So gentlemen, it is a pleasure that you are on our campus. It is a pleasure to have met each and every one of you because I always want to meet heroes and today we don't have enough of them. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything you have done for our country, that you have done for your race in making peace between people of color, and for the role models you are and what that means for our future. And I wonder if you could all join me in a huge round of applause for our heroes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Collin, for taking time out of obviously a very busy schedule to come and be with us. And I know that you have to leave, but we do appreciate you coming.
I want to see a little bit of this though before I
Good,
leave.
thank you. We're going to have a presentation by our Director of Archives and Library, Mrs. Brenda Square. I've only had an opportunity to work with Mrs. Square for a very short period of time, but she is truly a great professional, and she has told me how much she has enjoyed these presentations, and this is Brenda Square.
Good evening. I welcome all of our veterans of World War II, our families and friends. We're extremely honored and happy to have you here with us tonight. Tonight, we want to introduce you to the work of the archivist here at Amistad. Since 1966, for 35 years now, the Amistad Research Center has been preserving and making available original sources relating to the history of African Americans and other oppressed communities. These oral history tapes that you will see tonight introduce you to our current project. This is a project we've titled Voices of the Veterans. In the past few weeks, I have interviewed local veterans. We have sat and I've asked them to share their experiences during World War II, as well as their experiences growing up in a Jim Crow America. These interviews will shed great light to our understanding of a very important part of American history. We're very happy and thrilled about the collaboration among our local educational institution to present this symposium. I have a 20-minute video. This is just a mere taste of what we've done. We will continue to collect oral history interviews for the rest of this year. We hope to interview as many of you as we can. We invite you to contact the center, set up a time. We will come out to you if you can come in. We want you to tell your story. Your stories give us an important part of history. These pieces are the parts that have been omitted, unfortunately, because of racism and ignorance. If we don't get your story, we may never get it. So please contact the center and let us know that you want to share your story with us. It will be preserved and shared with our joint institutions, and we look forward to many publications which will include these interesting, unique aspects, perspectives, which we have not yet heard, which will bring us a greater understanding of our history. The center is committed to education. We believe that if we educate our communities, then we can strengthen our people, all people. For we are a unique country. We are a great country. And the struggle for freedom has been a very important part of world history. So we look forward to hearing from you. And please, please call us. Let us know what you have. If you know someone that hasn't contacted us, then give us that name and we will follow through. So we will now present our Voices of the Veterans.
I presume that we're going to now have some conversations, and I wanted to thank all of you for coming because the outpouring of support is just wonderful. There are a number of veterans in the audience, and before we get started, I'd like to just ask all of the World War II veterans who are present tonight if you just kindly stand so that we can recognize all of you. We appreciate very much this occasion and this event. As Russell Stockard said, it's a very challenging evening. I had the great pleasure of having one of my older brothers serve with distinction. And like most of you, I went back to do some research. And I found that he had served with great distinction and had more medals and honors and awards than any of us had ever thought about. So one of the things that's going to be an outcome of this event is that all of us will have a greater sense of understanding of our place in history. And so tonight is a very special evening. I'm delighted to serve as the moderator. We have 5 gentlemen and 1 wonderful lady. And although the program does not indicate that she comes first, by virtue of the authority given me as moderator, I'm going to call on her first. I'm basically going to call on her before Leonard Burns, because all of the men are longtime friends and business acquaintances, and I know that they're very loquacious and they can talk on and on and on. So I'm going to give the lady an opportunity to speak first, and we're going to call on Major Oral P. Hicks, U.S. Army Nurse Corps retired. If she will hold forth at this time, and then we're going to start with Leonard and work our way through. And after you, Nurse Hicks, we're going to put the men on a timer.
Okay.
But you can say anything you want to say. Please remain seated. And there's a microphone right over there.
First, I would like to say that I'm a Christian. I became a Christian in my teenage years, around 15. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I am one of 17 children born in Bogalusa, Louisiana, in the country. And by the time I came along, there was no money, there weren't any prayers. So by being a Christian, I tell people my father is rich. He owns the entire world. He'll make a way out of no way. And so while I was in Bogalusa, I finished grade school in Bogalusa. You couldn't finish high school there. I went to Southern University to finish high school. And from Southern, I taught school 3 years in Vernon, way back out in the woods. And I say the Lord sent a man out there to give me the address to the training school in Kansas City. I knew nobody in Kansas City. He said, how you like teaching school? I said, I like teaching school, but I want to be a nurse. Where are you going to take nurses? And I said, I don't know. He said, I know the superintendent of nurses in Kansas City. And I lit up, and I wrote. And for a year, I didn't hear. Then something said, write again, write again. And I wrote, and I was accepted. And I took the bus for 2 days and night up to Kansas City and spent 3 years there studying and came out a registered nurse. I returned back to New Orleans, and I worked at Charity Hospital almost 5 years. I knew very well about segregation because all Negroes worked on the colored ward, and the whites worked on the white ward. And outside where the bathroom was, it said nurses, but inside it said Negro nurses use the laboratory marked ladies. Outside of theirs was marked nurses, but I had to use the one that the visitors used. Anyway, I worked there, and we were stationed at, excuse me, they were building Charity Hospital, so I worked in the Pythian Temple. It was a Negro building. I worked on 7th floor, and we had patients everywhere, all over the floor, 2 in a bed, dying, give me the bed, as soon as someone died. Anyway, at Charity Hospital, I wrote to the Army, and after my physical, I was accepted, and I went into Camp Livingston, Louisiana, and I stayed there about a year and a half, and the chief nurse was going around for volunteers, said, who want to be transferred to Fort Huachuca? And I was on my hours off for sleep, and I woke up and said, I want to go, I want to go. And when I opened the door, I said, I don't want to go, I was playing. She said, oh no, your name is down, you're going. And to Fort Huachuca I went. Fort Huachuca was all Negro, the 92nd Division was there. And they had a white section and a color section. I worked on the color section, and finally they put me on the white section. I was there about 3 years, and I was transferred to a German prison war camp in Florence, Arizona, way out in the desert. There was so much dust out there until you had to put things over your windows to keep some of the dust out. They had about 10,000 German soldiers there. There was not a single Negro man. There was only one Negro family in Florence, Arizona. You had to catch the bus about 100 miles and ride up to Tucson to the beauty shop or wherever you wanted to go. But there were about 30 of us there. There were white nurses, civilian nurses, and they quit. They said they were not working with Negroes. I said, we were sent here. We didn't just come here. The Army sent us here. So they all resigned. So we stayed there until all of the German prisoners were sent back to Germany. And then the commanding officer of the post wife had fallen off a horse. So the Lord sent me to her and said, some of us want to stay in the Army and some of us want to get out. She said, bring me the names of those who want to stay in and those who want to get out. And that's how it ended after coming back from Washington. Those who want to get out with discharge. I wanted to stay in. So from the camp, German prisoner of war camp, I went to New York, Halloran, Staten Island, New York. And after being there about 2 years, I worked mostly on the ward where the patients were coming in from Germany, fractures. I worked on the fractured ward. You had about three or four rows of beds. You just bathed and rubbed until everybody was bathed. And from this hospital, I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And at Fort Dix, we were there about 2.5 years. And my name was called. And as I said, what have I done? What have I done wrong? Anyway, I went to the commanding office, and they were sending 5 white nurses and 1 Negro nurse to New York, to the Navy hospital during the unification program. And we would represent the Army. So we went down to the Navy hospital, and there we had mostly corpsmen assisting us. At night, you had about 12 or 13 wards, and you walked all night long, and you had to count for every narcotic. So the corpsmen were very good. They were as good as registered nurses, but they didn't handle the key. So I stayed there about 2.5 years at the Navy hospital in Long Island, New York, and I was transferred from there to Honolulu, Hawaii, and we caught the ship and went over to Honolulu. And this was like a vacation because it was such a wonderful place to be and going swimming and everything. But there I was on the psychiatric ward. And I might say I was in the Army 20 years. I spent more than 10 years locked up with the mentally ill patients. And being a Christian, I offered them Jesus Christ. Everybody I talked to, I said, everybody in the world have problems. We have them at different times. Don't be too big to cry. Don't be too big to pray. Many of them had committed different sins, raping and killing and whatever. And I would talk to them. And sometimes we had one fellow on that his breast was rather large. And of course, men, when they bathed, they all are nude. So they would say, your breast is larger than my old lady's. And send him to the mental ward. He wanted to cut him off. And we talked and talked. So finally, when you couldn't get well overseas, they would lock you down to a cart and put you on a ship and send you back to America. So he got real upset. And I told him, I said, well, you have to talk your problems out and tell it to somebody, but you don't keep telling it over and over, because each time you tighten up, you tighten up, you tighten up. Everybody have problems, so talk about your problems so we can tell it to the doctor. So he couldn't talk about it, so they locked him down and sent him back. I was locked up at Walter Reed 5 years. There were 3 generals locked up when I arrived there. There were 2 wards upstairs and 2 wards down. They had 72 beds. I never went on duty without 2 empty beds. There were 70 patients. There were never 5 Negroes on the ward at any one time. Most time, no Negroes. There were 25, after the head nurse left, I became head nurse. There were 25 men on the 3 to 11 and the 11 to 7 and 7 to 3 shift when I became head nurse. So when you made rounds, you had to take all the glasses from the patients so they wouldn't commit suicide at night, cut the risk. And one night, a patient wouldn't give up his glasses. All of the corpsmen were white, but 5, they were civilian. And so when I went up, 2 corpsmen with me, went upstairs asking for his glasses. I don't give my glasses to no such and such an end. And a little patient that was real sick, you don't call her that. She's a colored woman, but he was going to come fight for me. So, but trying to get along with all the patients and telling them, I'm telling you things your mother, your relative would like to tell you. And I would talk to them and talk to them. And after a while, 35 or 40 or 50 men on weekends when the doctors weren't there would be lined up. I want to talk to the nurse. I want to talk to the nurse. And of course, I would always tell them about Jesus Christ because I was a Christian. And before I left there were many parties given, letters written. We had colonels and generals, and we had an Air Force officer spent 1 year on that ward. He never left the ward. And we stripped them. Every week when they go down to eat, we look through through the books and everything to see if they had any razors. So one day he told his wife that we didn't have enough razors, so she brought him one. And that night he cut his wrist. That's why we had to search him and watch him closely. Anyway, spending 5 years, almost 5 years at Walter Reed, and talking and listening and working. We worked long hours. I was transferred to Germany, Landstuhl, Germany. Left Fort Dix, New Jersey, arrived at Franklin, Germany, and Carl met me out there, a man I never seen in life, did a lot of praying. Took it 100 miles down the highway to the hospital, and there I worked on the lock ward again. We had female wards who had very serious mental problems, and we had about 3 or 4 male wards. I might say they were full most of the time. And at Walter Reed, we were given shock therapy. That's when the first shock therapy, first dose of Thurazine I ever gave was at Walter Reed. It was the medicine to calm you down. It also made you bite on your tongue and do all sorts of things early when they were first given it. And sometimes the 25 and 30 patients would get shock therapy every morning. You put something in their mouth and hold them down, strain them, and they said while they were getting shocked, they would then think about, they bit their tongue, bit this, and they get the mind off of the problem. And so we would talk to them and follow them around to the games and out to the ball games and try to help them get off the problem, and especially the suicide ones. And I would talk to the corpsman and tell them, when the patient is going to the bathroom, there's no doors on the bathroom, watch him. But on the 311 shift, sometimes young corpsman would get to playing cards with the patients, and he wouldn't watch him. So we had one patient committed suicide on the ward. He took his shoestrings out and tied them together, and when they went in, he was standing up there dead. But it was very interesting work because I prayed a lot, had to do a lot of praying, because at Walter Reed, as I say, 20 of the men were white. Men they tell me, don't like to take orders from women, period. And a black woman, so you better know what you're doing and not know what you're saying. So I would tell them, let's all be on the same page. We're here for one purpose, to help the patient. And if you are mentally sick or have problems, we can't treat you as a patient. You have to come in to get treated. So I worked with the corpsman, and we got along. There were times when you had problems and they didn't understand. I would say, whenever you have a problem, you bring it to us. If a corpsman got 2 days off or 3 days off, there's a reason. His wife died and had a baby, and we'll explain it and work it all out. So after spending 3 years in Germany, I did a lot of traveling over there. I went to Spain. I spent a week in Spain, a week in Paris, London, Berlin, and we take 19-day trips, cost around $200, so it was real cheap over there. And we saw the Passion Play and the robe Jesus Christ supposed to wear, so you were exposed to a lot of things that you thought you'd never see. And all of the trips were very cheap. You could go for 19 days on $200. And when I went to Berlin, you'd have to write a letter and have to have everything on there, and they'd have to okay it, and somebody would follow you all the way. So it was very interesting, and I retired a major, and I came back and I did private duty nursing for about 12 years, and then I retired again from nursing. So it's been very interesting, and I thank you. I have a lot.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have a lot of pictures you can look at later on.
Major Hicks has brought a lot of stuff with her, and we're going to have a reception downstairs immediately following it, and you will have an opportunity to talk with each one of our presenters individually and review any memorabilia that they will have with them. The next 5 participants are men that I've known for a long time, very good friends, and I'm going to impose a time frame on them. We're going to start out with 5 minutes and see what we can do. We're going to start with Dr. Leonard Burns, who is a podiatrist and also the owner of Four Corners Travel. Leonard will start us, and then we're going to go down to Felix James, Nolan Marshall, Calvin Morey, the printer, and Russell Stockard, who started out on oral history. Leonard?
Thank you very much, Charlie. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to speak to a group so attentive as you. Since you've seen WDSU all this week, since you've seen the video, my time is up. Being one of those guys, as you probably have heard some remarks along the way, I couldn't feature myself being in the Army. Didn't like the Navy because of some of their practices. Still don't like some of those things they do either. Wasn't familiar with construction, that I could work in construction, but I saw these big, beautiful men in the Marine Corps with uniforms so polished and unique, and they did a recruiting job on me that I decided that I would go into the Marine Corps. And what happened, as was indicated, I spent some time at the Marine Corps recruiting office and became friendly with all the guys, and they were just hoping, waiting, and wishing that the president would sign the order to make it possible for us to get into the Marine Corps. When he did, they called me to tell me that I should be the first one to sign up, which I was, and I did. I was delighted to be the first one. I didn't know what I was getting into, though, being the first one. Being the first one sometimes make it the worst one. But yet we did find that the Marine Corps did wonders to help train me and others to make us the men that they promised to make us. We did some outstanding things. The one thing that I was told occasionally, well, over and over again in the recruiting office, go to as many schools as you possibly can, because they knew that I was out of Xavier and I had planned to return to Xavier. So I decided to go into transportation. Oh, beautiful idea of riding around in vehicles owned by the government. And they put me on the first run, an ammunition detail, to take some ammunition from Camp Lejeune to one of the lakes where they had fire practice. And I had to travel through the woods and not by the road, by the highway, because of the ammunition. Going over logs, bumps, holes, and all of this, and I was just watching that ammunition behind me because I don't want to be blown to smithereens. Got the ammunition to the site, unloaded the ammunition, got the empty truck back to the camp, and I resigned transportation. The next school I went to was quartermaster. Quartermaster in the Marine Corps dealt with supplies, being accountable for every spoon, every fork, every knife, every T-shirt, tanks, all the equipment. And with that, I delighted at that because that gave me an opportunity to get special consideration in the Marine Corps. I could get all the uniforms that I wanted free, and that was a pleasure too. But with that, I was assigned to be responsible for all of the equipment, not knowing that one of the details that we went out on to Hawaii. Now, going to Hawaii was a pleasurable thing. Gee whiz, go out to the beach and see all those beautiful seashells. Went to see all those seashells. The assignment, believe it or not, in quartermaster, when they were shipping equipment from the fighting front, we had to log that down to make sure that this equipment matched with the assignment that was given. It was a tank that was messed up, and inside that tank they had some arms, some hands, some fingers of some of the guys that were shot up. And with that, we just decided that, well, this is not the best area. So I went back to camp and decided to work with clothing. And, well, things got pretty tough there. And Iwo Jima came into being, and they were shooting like mad over there. And they recruited every living body, every able Marine, whether you were quartermaster or not, to go to the fighting front. And we took one of these Higgins boats, and I enjoyed that. Once we got to Iwo Jima, the lid went down, we walked out the boat, went on that sandy beach, and things were popping all around us. And I had been to New Year's Eve, I'd been to Mardi Gras, but I'd never been to anything like that. And I was very delighted when our captain called us back to the ship and told us to get back on the troop transport. We were then sent to Japan. And the reason we were sent there for occupation duty in Japan after the bomb fell in Hiroshima. I was again assigned to quartermaster, taking care of supplies, food, and what have you. And the training that I got was invaluable. The education that I got, I couldn't have paid for it. But I did leave the Corps and return to some of the beauties that they have here in the city of New Orleans and in America. I returned to Xavier University, completed work there, and then went on to medical school. And just think, I'm seeing beautiful people now, all in one piece, not like I saw them over there in the fighting zones. But it's always been a pleasure, and I enjoyed my tour of duty in the Marine for several reasons. The benefits that I received there was most educational and most rewarding, and it helped to make a better man out of me. Thank you. Who's next? Felix?
I'm the guy you heard on the tube there about flying primary training. Needless to say, my stint in primary training and in flying was very short. Matter of fact, there were 54 of us initially in the class, and I think if my memory best serves me, there were about 8 of us who eventually became flying officers. I had the pleasure of moving, however, into the 332nd Fighter Group under General, who is now General, Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. Got to know him pretty well as a person. Had the pleasure of going overseas with the 332nd as a non-com in the medical section of the 332nd Fighter Group. I need tell you that we encountered just about as much racism, if you want to call it that, as any group who had the honor of going overseas to fight. We were at Camp Patrick Henry, and they wouldn't allow us to come in the PX. That was just one of the kinds of things. We left Camp Patrick Henry on December the 31st, 1943, and we were going to Italy. And the ship we got on was called the William Few. We called it the Billy Few. It was a freighter. It was an old rusty freighter. And this was the 332nd Fighter Group. Colonel at that time, Benjamin O. Davis and his group. And when we got on, we were in the hold of the ship, and they put an iron rim with a canvas slat, piece of canvas in, and did cross stitches to hold them. And it was 5 tiers high. And you had to grab that iron and slide in. And of course, I don't know how many of you have traveled overseas on the ocean in a freighter. But I'm telling you, you talk about sick people. And there were 1,215 of us on that ship. The officers, of course, and there were only a few officers with us, they had little cabins on the top deck, but we were in the whole of the ship. Well, I'll tell you, most of us, when we got off the ship in Italy, we'd lost anywhere from 15 to 20 to 30 pounds, because a week out of getting into Taranto, Italy, we were on prunes for a week. I kid you not, we were out of food. We're out of food. Be that as it may, I need to, and I'd like to tell you something about the 332nd and the job that they did in Italy while we were there. When we first got to Naples, when we got to Italy on the boat, we hit Taranto, Italy, on the boot. We were not supposed to go there, but the Billy Few broke its rudder in the Mediterranean, and we were towed into Taranto, Italy. And we moved to Naples at Capocacina Airfield. And we were with the 12th Air Force, and we were flying P-39s. I was not flying. I was a medical NCO at the time. And we were what was called strategic. We were in the strategic Air Force. We had to aid the troops on the ground who were fighting. We had to do strafing. We had to strafe German machines, German cars, bomb a little bit. Well, we did that in Naples, and we escorted freighters coming into Naples to discharge troops and that kind of things. That became a hazard for us because the outfit was given old airplanes, and 2 or 3 fellows lost their lives. So General Davis went to Washington and protested. And General Hap Arnold, who was commanding general of the Air Force at that time, sided with him, and we moved to an Italian town, Ramatelli, and we got the P-51 aircraft. And that's the aircraft you heard a lot about, of what the 332nd did after we got that aircraft. We had expert pilots, the guys could fly, and we then joined what was known as a strategic Air Force, not a tactical, a strategic. Our job then was to escort bombers. At that time, I moved into the group clinic, and I was the NCO in charge of the clinic under Major Vance H. Marchbanks, Jr. And our job, of course, was to care for the health of the entire unit. But I need to tell you that when we got the P-51s, the things that you might have seen in the movie was absolutely correct and true. We never lost a bomber to German fighters. And it was because Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. was the kind of commander that he was. As you know, he was a West Pointer, spit and polish. Everything had to be exactly like it should have been. When we went out on the mission, we had a word in the 332nd that was called lollygagging. There was no lollygagging. That means, yes, and getting off on the wrong track. Everything was done according to Hoyle. And when that unit went out, and the reason I can sit here and tell you about it is because being the medical NCO and having the medical dispensary, we had a 2-way radio, one of these large things that could pick up the voices from miles and miles away. And we would hear the pilots over the targets. And we could hear the commanders of each unit telling each pilot what it is he's doing or not doing during the mission. And it was a unit that would just make your heart swell, because all of the guys who worked on the airplanes, I'd say 85 to 90% of the guys who worked on the planes were college graduates. And we didn't have, we were not a unit when the headquarters said we want maximum missions for this mission. We never missed having a maximum mission. By that I mean, if they asked for 34 airplanes to escort this bomber mission, we had 34. There was no question about it. We had mechanics on the flying line who had gone to Chanute Field and were trained in armament, engines, wing flaps, anything that had to do with the airplane. We had experts on the line doing it. My main job, of course, during that time was to see that doctors were available on the line and ambulances were available on the line. When the pilots came back, if something happened, we had to make sure we had somebody there to care for them. We had the two-way radio. We could tell if somebody's plane was crippled and we anticipated having a crash. We would then have to send an additional airplane out to help there. All of the men who were pilots, except in the last month of the Tuskegee experience of the pilots being trained, they were college graduates. So we had a group of men where there weren't problems. Everybody was pushing to be better. Everybody, the entire group. And until this day, these men, or those kind of men, I should say. Is my time up? I'm a talker. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I didn't tell you half of the story.
Well, now that I've had the advantage of listening to these other persons, there are so many things that I could duplicate that I won't say. I'm Nolan Marshall, former First Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. I'm going to try to give you a summation of what we did in a matter of minutes. I joined the Marine Corps 4 months after Leonard. Leonard's brother and I were together. There were 4 of us to go at the same time. Another fellow's named Kermit White, many of you might know, and another person named White. I've forgotten White's name. But we had that same segregated train to North Carolina, Jacksonville, and they picked us up in the back of a truck about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and we had no idea where we were going because we were going down this long road. We didn't even have the opportunity to see the nice barracks that Leonard saw. It was pitch black, and we were just in the country going down. And finally, we arrived at one little hut. That little hut was the duty officer's hut. Here we are, 4 individuals, straight civilians, walking into the hut. We walk up to this guy that's sitting behind the desk. I think he was a sergeant. He was the duty sergeant of the day. And White had our delivery papers. I had our induction papers, and he gave them to him. And we were standing there, and boy, whoop! We heard something. Had a little private or corporal, PFC or something, sitting behind us on the sack. He was the assistant officer of the day, sergeant of the day. And boy, he got up and whoop! He hit poor White in the butt, told him, stand at attention. Stand at attention. You're in the Marine Corps now. We didn't send for you. We're going to turn you around. We're going to send you back. You're going to quit. Now, that was our introduction in the Marine Corps, the very first night. Now, after that, we got involved in the recruit training.
But while you were doing this, Don Nolan, we were cooking gumbo, waiting for you guys to come in.
Shut up.
I wish that was so. Don't break my chain of thought now, because I'm gonna get through quickly. Well, the first thing we know, we're up the next morning, bright and early, and we're hitting it for camp. We're outside in a sawdust and sand center area, street where our huts were. They were not barracks. Same hut he described with the big pot-belly stove in the center. We were greeted by white drill sergeants. But they weren't sergeants, they were corporals. Rarely did you see a sergeant. They were all corporals for the most part. And boy, they were some of the meanest guys you ever want to lay eyes on. And we went through the next several months under these fellows learning to be a Marine. Well, we were trained and trained well. Shortly after that, they chose 6 black guys. At that time, there were no black people at all in ranks. They chose 6 to be the first drill sergeants in the Corps. And ultimately, they were promoted to PFC. But they also chose 6 what they call acting jacks, and that was persons to assist those PFCs. Well, I was one of the acting jacks. So initially and early on, the first black drill sergeants, you might say, they had, I was one of them. Leonard's brother was right there with us. He's in the same platoon. I was taken out of that platoon and made an acting jack. Well, a few months later, all of the white drill sergeants were transferred out of the Corps, out of our office. And of course, we had the responsibility to train the Marines after that. Now, I'm told that we were meaner than the white guys that were there. But we didn't know any better. And we thought that that was the only way by which you could train a Marine, by being the way that we were. And so this is what we did for several months. Finally, my time was to go overseas. We left Mountford Point. I was a gunnery sergeant at the time on the ship, on the plane going to Norfolk, Virginia. I had a decent commanding officer. And he called me in, and we called first sergeants in the Marine Corps Top. He said, Top, I want you to take some dictation. I said, very well, sir. He promoted a full complement of black Marines to their rank to fill up the entire company with rated people. Therein, I became the first black first sergeant in the Corps at that time. Now, the other guys got promoted and promoted and promoted up. Here we are now on a ship in a convoy going to the Pacific. We have a wreck at sea. One of the ships in the convoy lost a rudder, ran into us, crippled us. We could not go with the convoy anymore, so we had to put into Charleston, South Carolina, and they repaired our ship. When they repaired our ship, it was named USS Orizaba. By then, we got back in the Atlantic. We're going down. We're going to go through the Panama Canal. And like Leonard said, they put us in the hold, too, down in the bottom of the ship. But this was a troop ship. We were down in the bottom. But while we were aboard, ashore rather, while they were repairing the ship, I found out that they gave quarters to all of the sailors who were chief petty officers and all of the Marines who were first pay graders. But I was down in the hold with my men. And when I found this out, when we got back on the ship, I went to my commanding officer and said, I don't deserve to be down there. I want what my rank justifies me to be. He said, you're right, Sergeant. But the chief petty officers in the first pay grade were assigned quarters that might have 4 of those persons of that rank in a quarter, not more than 6 at any given time. What they did for me, they wouldn't put me in there with them, but they gave me a section all by myself. And they said, you may choose a runner if you'd like. So they gave me a fellow, and I chose H.T. Lewis, another fellow from Natchitoches, Louisiana, to be my runner. Well, we go down in the Pacific, and we go to New Caledonia. We get to New Caledonia. All the white soldiers on New Caledonia had never seen a black Marine before. And having had the experience I had as a drill sergeant, my company had won a commendation from the Commandant of the Marine Corps because we put on the drill for them when they came down to Montfort Point to view the black Marines. Well, when we going into the camp at New Caledonia, I'm telling you, we were spit and polished and clean and hidden it right on time. We got in, left face, right face, order arms, turn around, salute the commanding officer, and they were aghast. They were looking at a whole bunch of guys, all black Marines. Where you come from? Well, the long story about that island was they had an NCO officers mess too, a staff NCO officers mess. That's where the chief petty officers went. That's where I went. When I got there, one of the white master sergeants who had a handlebar mustache, big red one that was twisted out on the end, had more years in the Marine Corps than I was old because I was 20 years old. He told me, he said, boy, you're in the right church but the wrong pew. Time.
Team.
Huh? Okay, well, you know, huh? He told me I was in the right church but the wrong pew. Okay, I'll step it up. Finally, when we found out in the NCO mess, they had all black cooks. And all the black cooks, when I would go in, they would treat me like I was a king. And this one guy that had the hanging handlebar mustache, I would oftentimes watch to see when he was going to the mess so that I could go and run him. Because every time I went in the mess, he'd leave. But these guys, these cooks, they gave me fresh eggs. They gave me things that the troops didn't really get. But staff NCOs got it. We left there and we went to Guadalcanal. On the way to Guadalcanal, we were going to join, we were on the way to Benique. We found out then that we were supposed to be service troops. We were supposed to be not fighting troops. This is the first time we heard that. But we were going to unload the ships and prepare the equipment. Man, you can do that all you want. I got the floor.
He's a Marine. He's a Marine.
Well, anyway, we went to Benique. That's when we found out that we were going to unload ships. And when I got on Marine, they had two on Benique. They had two other, the first and second Marine depots. You remember those? They had gone out long before us. And this was the monsoon season. And they were downhill at the bottom of the hill and sleeping literally in mud because we had nothing but field cots. You know those things that cross in there? You got canvas? Okay, that's what they had. And we were unloading ships every night. We were unloading lumber. We were unloading wire. We were unloading screen, plastic screen. We were unloading everything that they used to build up follies, which the white Marines had up on top of the hill. Now the follies were built up. They had screen all around them. They had wooden decks. They had electric lights, and they had cots. Those two Marine 1st and 2nd Division depot companies that were down there were still sleeping in mud. We were assigned an area, so help me God. They had one pole standing up in the middle of the tent and one guideline on each end, and the whole tent was doing like this in solid mud. Well, that's where we had to go and we had to pitch our area. After we were on there about 2 weeks, I got all our troops together and I told them, I said, I'm not going to teach you to steal and I'm not going to tell you to steal. But if you don't come back here with some wire and some 2x4s and some other things, they're unloading all of this stuff, you know. So, sure enough, we had a couple of guys in there that were carpenters. We made a design, cut out the wood, stash it in the back, and instead of going to the movies like we used to go to every night, sit on a log, ponchos, in the rain. I said, you're going to build your fathers tonight, because all of them were cut out. They had everything, and they built the tents. We went up the coconut tree and tapped into the line and got electric lights down the end of one. We had a captain who was named Apperson. Never forget him. He was from Lake Charles, Louisiana. He used to call up every morning, and he didn't realize that we were listening, but he would call up through the system to ask down at the 1st and 2nd Marine depots that they had been doing all along. He'd call down every morning and ask, how are my niggas this morning? But we were listening to that then, okay? After we got the tents and the filers all built up, he called me over to his office. He said, Sergeant Marshall, I see you boys got filers down there. I said, yes, we do. I said, Captain, I don't understand how those guys been down here all these months and still sleeping in that mud. They didn't have gumption to get out of there and do what they had to do. I said, my man had more pride than they sleep in that like that when all that lumber was on the river, on the wharf. He said, well, now listen, Sergeant Marshall. He said, let me tell you. Next time you get ready to do something like that, you ask for permission. If I had asked for permission, we would have still been sleeping in that mud. And no question about it. We left there and went to Guadalcanal to join the 1st Marine Division. And here again, we had an opportunity to show off our smartness, our ability to drill, perform, and whatnot. And this is when we went into the 1st Marine Division. We went in the same way, under the same circumstances. All of these white guys, they out gawking at us when we come in. Never saw us anything. Then they see a black first sergeant and others, gunnery sergeants, platoon sergeants. You know, they hadn't seen nothing like that before. Boy, when we stopped, all of them looking out there, and a little black dog ran out there after us, barking and whatnot, and somebody and said, come here, nigga, come on back here. Calling the dog nigger. Okay? So what happened, though, the colonel in that instance changed the name of the dog to Inky. Right. We left from there, we went in the invasion of Peleliu. That is when we saw action. I find that in that episode, there were more black Marines lost out of my individual company than any of the other companies, any one of the other companies. We got a letter of commendation from the Commandant of the Marine Corps about that as well. He says, you've done well and you've proven your right to serve in the Marine Corps. That's what the organization, you remember that, don't you? Yeah. So,
That's it,
I know.
been-
No, he told me, I finished in 5 minutes. I
he's the
finished
one
in
that-
5 minutes.
He's been telling.
Yeah, but he's circling around like that. I
Yeah.
know what he means, but I'll just ignore
Tell
him.
him you kept going around that corner.
Okay, I'm through now. I'm through.
Nice going, Nolan. You may.
Dr. Tima, is my cutoff time at 7:30? You've been hearing the stories from these other three gentlemen, and there are thousands and thousands of stories. Each one is different. Each one of us has a particular time and a particular place to be under circumstances that are different from anyone else. So each one of us has a different story to tell. Now, Felix James told you his story of his experience at Tuskegee. I came along a little later, and I would think that the authorities had learned some of the things that they were doing were not in the best interest of the country, in that we were then, in my class anyway, with black instructors. In the period from his time to my time, there was a buildup of black pilots from around the country who were trained to become instructors. My brother was one of them. There is a gentleman in the back there who also was a classmate of my brother's, who had both learned to fly before the war began. my brother stayed on and went to become an instructor, and he instructed all the way through the period at Tuskegee. But back to myself, with black instructors in the primary, I didn't have any of the racial problems that Felix had to overcome or experience. So my training period then was a positive thing. I could learn, I could develop, I could build, so that I became a producer in what I was being trained to do. When we went to, after primary, we went to what was called the base, which was a military establishment some few miles away from Tuskegee's campus. And we were placed under white flight instructors. To my knowledge, none of them had combat experience, but they were experienced pilots. But in all likelihood, the word had come down from the commanding officer, who I knew was a really good guy who wanted this whole thing to move along in the proper way, had been versed into how to treat the cadets that were under their instruction. And I personally never had any of those racial epithets passed on to me. But I was able to then progress in a way that qualified me. And someone has asked me why was I made a flight officer when graduation time came, and my only reason, or the reason that I have come up with, is that only the guys who were less than 20 years of age at the time were made flight officers. Everybody in the same class who was over 20 were made second lieutenants. And somebody, I guess, had to make a cutoff point, and that was the cutoff point in my situation. From Tuskegee, I went down to Eglin Field, Florida for gunnery, and it's a complicated thing. If you've ever fired a shotgun, you're standing in a position shooting at a moving target. That's understandable. But from an airplane, you're in a moving platform shooting at a moving target. It's quite difficult. And it required quite a bit of training to be able to fire and hit a target that was moving. From there, we came back to Tuskegee, and I might make a reference to his class numbers. We started flying with 72 men and graduated with 36, which was a far cry from the early numbers. And the need for pilots was so apparent that there was an expansion to the whole program. The first class graduated with 5 men. And 5 men couldn't do a whole lot when you compare it to 36. So from Eglin Field, Florida, we came back to Tuskegee for transition into the P-40s, and I have a pride inside that I was checked out in a P-40 by Captain Charles Hall, who was the first black American to shoot down an enemy airplane in World War II. From there, after transition, we were sent to Walterboro, South Carolina for actual military tactics. We knew how to fly the airplanes. We had about 300 hours in the air at the time, but we needed military tactics. And a lot of the guys that we worked with had been overseas, came back, and we had training there. But also, we were going to be assigned to protecting bombers. So we had frequent rendezvous missions with flights of bombers that would come from north of our area. And the whole thing was coordinated with the Marine stations along the Atlantic coast and the Navy stations also, to have rendezvous with these bombers, escort them a length of time, then the others would take over. So it was a training period that was quite intense, because I'm speaking of early 1945. The war was raging heavily over there, and Leonard made reference to the barracks that he was assigned to in North Carolina. Well, I don't think they moved them, Leonard, but we had the same kind in South Carolina, and we were officers, but it didn't make a difference. we still had those same pot-bellied, type of pot-bellied stoves. The war continued, and we continued training. Sometimes we'd be in the air from 5:30 in the morning till midnight, with breaks in between, naturally, for reloading airplanes with different assignments of flying missions. But in my particular case, the war ended in Europe 4 days before my class was to leave to go overseas. It was the first class that graduated at Tuskegee that did not go overseas. From there, they decided that we should be sent to another field to fly the type of airplanes that were being used in the Pacific. We were sent to Godman Field, Kentucky, right adjoining Fort Knox, just not far from Louisville. And we started flying the P-47s. Prior to that, we had just been flying P-40s. The P-47 was, as far as I'm concerned, a super airplane. I understand that it's not the airplane that the P-51 was, and I couldn't blame them for not using the P-51s for training purposes when they could be used in the war over Europe. However, I never did get to fly the P-51. I certainly would have enjoyed doing that. Now, there are other things that we need to consider in all of this, and it's the conditions that have developed through the years relative to the relationships and the lack of input that anybody, black, white, or whatever, can produce if he's held down. And I've always contended that the more we know, the better we can perform, the better we can produce. So we can all put into the pot if we have the training. So whenever we have been held down, we hold everybody down. Everybody has to be kept down. And I've often asked the question relative to the flying experiences that I've had and the people that I've contacted. And I asked the question, how many servicemen died in those bombers? The pilots, the bombardiers, the navigators, the gunners, the fathers, the sons, the husbands, until they had the protection of those black pilots who had been denied for such a long time the experience of escorting those bombers. It's a question that we should all consider, not only relative to the experiences over Europe, but in our everyday experiences whenever we hold somebody down or don't allow them to develop to their potentials, then we hurt ourselves. So I often think about this, and some of the various talks I've given, I express that because I feel strongly that the white people who made the decisions to not allow blacks to elevate to positions hurt themselves much more than they hurt the blacks. And I would hope that gatherings of this sort bring things like this about so that masses of people, not just small gatherings like this, can get to know it. And I often have faulted the medium, or the media, period, to include all the media, for some of these things. In this morning's paper and in yesterday's paper, there were two accounts of two men's service to the country that I had never in my life seen. And I would hope that masses of white people particularly would read those things and recognize the contributions that we as a people made to this country, and how much better off we would all be if those things had not existed. And we can only learn in the future from the experiences that we've had in the past. And I would hope that these experiences that have been brought out in the newspaper lately would serve as a stepping stone to our decision making in the future. Thank you very much.
I might add one thing to this decent captain that we had was killed on Peleliu. And that was a real decent man, a real good man, but he was killed when we were there. Sorry.
We're going to end it up with Mr. Russell Stocker.
The reason I'm last is that I'm younger than these other guys.
He looks that way.
I don't mean that literally. I mean that physically and chronologically. I went into the military at 16. I didn't have to go. I had two older brothers there, and I simply had to go because they were there. And I'm going to refer to 3 or 4 incidents, experiences that I had in the military, because I'll get into difficulty with the moderator if I attempt to follow this from the time I was inducted until I returned to the United States. The first incident I want to refer to is when I, in the Army Air Corps, I was transferred for training to Keesler Field. And I had a first cousin that was an MP there, and he tried to get me to become a military policeman, and in doing so, I would have been able to remain at Keesler Field for the duration, for the remainder of the war. And I was thinking seriously about that until I made a trip into Gulfport. And this was an experience I had never had before. And I was told that this was how Afro-Americans reacted to whites in Gulfport. In walking down the street, you had to step off of the pavement, the sidewalk, if a white person was approaching you. I kid you not. So when I experienced that, I decided that I didn't want to remain in Gulfport as a military policeman. The other experience that I had was on our trip, on our 23-day trip from Newport News to Casablanca, North Africa. And again, I don't think these guys placed enough emphasis on those grain ships that you see now in these industrial canals, where they cleaned out the bottom and put something, a little top on them. And this was basically the troop-carrying ships overseas. All right, we were on one of these some 12 days out of Newport News, and we went below. They had an iron door. I guess that door, and iron then was iron. It wasn't anything less than that then. And we went below, and they had 2 guards on board. They locked their door, something like 250 men down below, and they locked that door. About 12 days out of Newport News, we heard what we thought was a bomb. And then after the great noise, then you could hear the water. We had been rammed by one of the more than 125 ships in this convoy. And it was at night. The officer in charge, he gave the alarm, and he supposedly gave the alarm for the 2 sentries who were above board. Now, we were locked down, wasn't one way out of there. And this huge door, I guess it must have been at least that thick, and I guess the normal size height door. But the collision had knocked the 2 sentries, guards, off of the boat. So they could not open this iron door, which could only be opened from the outside. So the officer said, well, it's not but one way we're going to get out of here. We can't go through that. I guess a hole in that ship must have been half as big as this room is. So he said, the only way we're going to get out of here alive is that we're going to have to knock this door open. So he told the 2 biggest guys down there, these guys were huge. He said, now, the only way I think we can get out of here is that you guys have to knock that door open. And he told these guys to get down like you see these NFL linemen get down. And they hit that door, and the first time, it didn't budge. He said, men, you got to hit it harder. And these guys, grown men were crying, and it was turmoil. And so these guys got down there a second time, and they hit this door, and bam, it popped open. We went to the deck. They took us off of that ship, and we had to fall out of the convoy. Now, that was before we even reached North Africa. Now, the other thing that I want to point out to you, there are many things that I could, but I had an older brother that was killed in the 92nd Division, and he was also at Fort Huachuca and also at Fort Pope here in Louisiana. But if any of you saw the movie Finding Private Ryan, to me that's the best military movie that has been produced in this country. It was much like what we experienced in Europe. Now, I had an older brother who was much like Tom Hanks, who was not a military type person. If you remember, Tom Hanks was a teacher, and he simply was doing his duty as my brother was. And my brother was the most unlikely person to be a soldier. He did all the finer things of life. He didn't want to play football. He told my daddy that simply wasn't what he wanted to do. But he played the piano, he played the clarinet. He would have been a professional golfer if he had lived through the war. I can assure you of that. He was that good. See. But anyway, he was drafted. He went into the military. They placed him in the 92nd Division, the Buffalo Division. He became a platoon sergeant. I never thought he had that ability or that kind of stamina. He came home after his basic training, and he had fallen arches. And my mother said, well, why don't you apply for a medical discharge? He said, I can't. He said, I have men that I'm responsible for, and I've got to return. All right, he returned to active duty after that to furlough. He was sent overseas as an advanced party, the 372nd Advanced Party. They, of course, went into southern Italy. After he'd been there a while, he was machine gunned his left side from under his armpit all the way down to his knees. So he had to go into rehab. See, now at the same time, you see, he was on the Adriatic side of Italy, and I was on the Tyrone Sea, the Mediterranean Sea side of the boot. So we contacted each other. We wrote each other frequently. I never saw him while we were over there. But after he had rehabbed, in 1944, when the Germans were making their last and final push, because we had gotten things in this country moving and we were producing, and it was, they could almost see the handwriting on the wall. And they were making their final push in Europe. And my brother could have asked for a medical discharge. But he said, I've got to return. They need me. And he returned to active duty. He was a platoon sergeant. And he went on a mission and was reported missing in action. And of course, after a year, he was declared dead. Now, I want to say this to many of the youngsters today. I know this is true of many Afro-Americans. It may be true of other ethnics in our society. But when you talk about your country, when you talk about freedom, you have no idea the price that some people have paid for your freedom. My oldest brother was killed. My second oldest brother, after serving a stint in Europe, he went to the Pacific where he contacted malaria. He never, ever, as you know, they had no antibiotics for malaria at that time. It weakened his body, and he died at a fairly early age. My daddy never recovered from his oldest son, first reported missing in action, and then reported dead. Now, of the 4 persons in my mother and daddy's family, World War II took 3 of them. Now, that's the price that my mother and father's family paid for freedom. So when I hear people talk about, this is not my country, I wouldn't fight for it, I'm not patriotic, I can't I can't have any discussion with people who think like that. This is your country. It's my country. We pay the price for it, and we deserve whatever privileges anyone else deserves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Sure.
I'd like the audience to just bear with me for about 5 minutes.
That's what time he gave you.
If possible. My brother wanted to come tonight, but for some reason or another he didn't. But we wrote a poem, and I'd like to just share it with you this
Who's your
afternoon.
brother?
I will not go into the history of where it came from and how it surfaced after 55 years. But in brief, thank you, Dr. King. What are we fighting for? What are we fighting for? It's important that everyone should know that the question of the Negro. This is an old copy from the paper, Dr. King.
Take your time, take your time.
What are we fighting for? It's important that everyone should know, but the question has greater significance as it relates to the Negro. We're fighting because we feel that, meager though every contribution made to the cause be, we too are part of this great USA. We are fighting for an enduring peace, one that will give liberal men the thrill to worship God and serve mankind with liberty of conscience and freedom of will. We are fighting that the philosophy, ideas, and teachings of Jesus Christ, which the Axis nations would destroy, may live on forever, regardless of price. And lastly, for the Axis nations, we are fighting to show, though conditions in America are not always to the best interest of the Negro, we are loyal to the cause, faithful to the trust, ever in hope of a better future, and we can, we will, we must. We are fighting so that slavery will not be our task, the future peace of our posterity. Justice itself is all we ask. We are sending our loved ones to help protect our great nation and name. They would rather die a hero than to live a life of shame.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Major Hicks has asked me to read excerpts from a letter that I think will be very helpful to you. And this is from her commanding officer, which says, I can say without qualifications that Captain Hicks has the warmest and most helpful relationship with psychiatric patients of any nurse with whom I've ever had any contact. This has been substantiated by repeated letters from former patients who have been discharged from the hospital stating just how helpful and supportive their relationship with Captain Hicks had been while they were patients on the closed ward. In this respect, she is truly a remarkable woman. And I thought all of you would like to know that. Thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this has been an exciting and exhilarating evening, and I would now like to present to you another real American hero, a young man who received on January 13th, 1997, the Medal of Honor. Please join me in greeting First Lieutenant Vernon J. Baker. I'm not going to talk. You're not going to talk?
I didn't come here to talk.
Mr. Baker said he didn't come here to talk, but he just wanted to come and say hello.
Thank you very much. I didn't come with a speech. I didn't bring a speech. But the only thing that I can say is that I appreciate you having me here. It's an honor and a privilege to see all the good people here and to hear some of the stories that some of my compatriots here have spoken to you. I don't want to tell you any stories because I think you've heard enough of the blood and guts and the things that have happened to us as we were coming up as young men. So all I'll say is that I thank you very much, and I have a saying that I dreamed up myself one night when I woke up about midnight. When I talk to the people, and I said to myself, I'm going to tell everybody this when I have a chance to talk to people. And I say that I don't see, when I look out here, I don't see white, I don't see black, I don't see red, yellow, or green. I see America. And that's what we are in America. God bless you. I love you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. We have some presentations that we'd like to make to our heroes this evening, and we're going to do that right now very quickly. And while we're doing that, I want to recognize Mr. Nick Mueller, Dr. Nick Mueller, who is the chairman of the board of the D-DayMuseum. Nick, would you please stand and let us recognize you? And I know it's very dangerous when you start recognizing people, but I could not help but recognizing Councilman at Large James Singleton, who is seated beside me. If you Councilman Singleton is a military officer, I believe, a colonel, general. He's retired. Could I have the certificates, please? Okay. Yes. We have certificates of special congressional recognition presented to all of our honorees this evening, and we also have proclamations from the City of New Orleans, from the mayor to Mr. Vernon Baker. This is Vernon Baker Day, February 2nd, 2001. Welcome to New Orleans. And we have certificates to all of our panelists and honorees from the Amistad Research Center. We want you to know that this is one of the hidden treasures in our city. We will be happy to receive your papers, your memorabilia, so that it is our plan and our hope that next year at this time we can have another celebration and give you all of the time that you'd like to have to tell the stories that we know you can tell. And Mr. Marshall said he was brief tonight, and I'll have to tell all of you, you know Nolan is one of my very dear friends. I've heard all of those stories over and over again. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate very much all of you coming to this occasion. We want to thank the D-DayMuseum, Southern University, Tulane, the Amistad, and everyone who's had an opportunity to participate in this. This has been truly a great occasion. And all of you will know that we face many challenges in this country, but I think my colleagues have said it all, that we only see one group of people here tonight. We're all truly Americans. Thank you so very much for coming this evening. There will be a reception downstairs.